My name is Mark Gusmano. I am a sales engineer here at Sencha. And what we're going to do in this webinar is officially introduce our newest offering called ReExt. We'll explain what it is. We'll take a look at how you use the product, and also take a look at some preview elements that we're working on that will aid you in being productive with ReExt in your React implementations. So what is ReExt? Well, simply the name actually is a combination of the word React and Ext from our Ext JS framework. So ReExt is a React library that brings the Sencha Ext JS components into React. So if you are considering building React applications, as you probably know, the React product does not come with a set of components, certainly not a set of robust data-centric components for business web application development. So ReExt gives you the ability to use all the powerful Sencha Ext JS components, and you use them like you use any other React component. The other thing about ReExt is it's very simple. It's very approachable. It's so simple that it's just one component, the component called ReExt. That component has 5 props and any event props that the component events need to be handled. So, for example, on the right-hand side of the screen, you see the ReExt component as a React component with several of the props. One of the main props is X type. X type of button gives you a button. X type of grid gives you a grid. Those of you who have used Ext JS are very familiar with what an X type is. It's the way you create instances of types of components. You'll also notice class name and style, which are two props to give you ability to style your ReExt component. Then there is a config component. That component is all of the configs that are necessary to further create whatever X type you're creating. For example, a button will have a text config, a grid would have a columns config, etc. Then there will be several events. There's a standard event called ready that gives you the ability to call into the component. And then any event that's a part of the underlying Ext component, for example, the click event for a button, will be referenced with an on click. So the word on and then capitalized of the first letter. So again, very, very simple, very straightforward. The X type prop exposes all of the visual Ext JS components. I mentioned buttons, I mentioned grids, tree views, pivots, calendar, charting, everything that's available in the Ext JS library. You can also support custom X types. So if you've been building Ext JS applications, and let's say you've built a custom grid that is based on our grid, you subclass that grid, and now you have an X type called custom grid. You can use that custom X type within ReExt and use it within your React application. ReExt itself is not Ext JS version dependent, it is not toolkit dependent, and it is not theme dependent. You can use any 7x version, so from 7.0 all the way to the latest 7.8 product. Those are all of the releases that are currently active with Ext JS, either toolkit, the modern toolkit or the classic toolkit, and any of the themes that are available. You can also create your own custom themes. Perhaps you've created a theme or want to create a theme with our Sencha Themer product. You can then bring that theme, that custom theme, into your ReExt product, into your ReExt project. Another key thing is that ReExt is not tied to any build environment. We tend to use what's popular out there, and currently what's popular is a tool called Vite, V-I-T-E, but we did not build any dependencies into the product. So you are free to use React and ReExt in any way or with any tool set that you choose to. We don't modify the Ext JS SDK at all. You just bring that SDK into your environment and use it as is. What this gives us is the ability to support future versions of Ext JS without having to make any changes to the product, because the fundamentals of the props and the configs and the events are pretty standard across versions of Ext JS. And ReExt is available just like any other React component is available as an NPM package. And we'll take a look at that NPM package in a moment here. So why are we focusing on React? Well, React is definitely a very popular library that's out there. It is undoubtedly the most popular, as you can see in this list. But as I said before, React does not come with a set of components. It does not come with a set of data-centric components. And so the marriage of React as a library, as a UI library, and the Ext JS components as your data-centric components is really a perfect match. So React made a lot of sense to implement. You'll also notice that as we move forward here, that we're also doing some work to build some tools within Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is a very popular code editor. It's the editor that I will use as I show you these examples. And so Visual Studio Code makes sense as a first foray into a set of supporting productivity tools for the ReExt product. So let's get into looking at the product. So ReExt is available, as I mentioned before, as an NPM package, and it is on the public NPM repository, so npmjs.com, what you typically go to for any NPM packages. It is scoped to the @Sencha organization, so @Sencha/ReExt. So that is how you install the ReExt product, by doing an npm install @Sencha ReExt. Of note on this page is quite a bit of supporting information, documentation. There's a table of contents here that'll get you through all of the things that are part of this README file, including a link to examples, a link to the VS Code extension that we're building and that I'll preview to you today, quick starts, step-by-step guides, some documentation, information about acquiring Ext JS, etc. So I would highly encourage you to walk through this README to get an example or to get an idea of what's available and how you would use ReExt in your project. There's also a set of examples that are available, and they're actually available from within this npm repo. And you can see down here in the table of contents, the first item is ReExt examples. So if you were to select and click on these ReExt examples, you'd see kind of like a kitchen sink of all of the components that are available to ReExt. So in this particular case, we have a tab with various sub-tabs on it. We have a page that uses, in this particular case, a custom grid. It's handling events. So there's quite a bit here. We even talk about some of the Ext JS premium components like a calendar, D3. There's graphs in here. So this is a really good place to go to get an idea of what components are available within ReExt. Also, you'll notice on the right-hand side here, there is some copy and paste capable example code. So if you wanted to know how to implement this chart, as you can see here, I'm doing an import of the ReExt component. We'll talk a little bit more about this as we move forward here. And then this React component itself is using the ReExt component with an X type of Cartesian, and Cartesian is our charting package. If I went to calendar, you can see how simple this can be. I'm implementing, again, ReExt as an import, and then I'm building a ReExt component type equal calendar. And the only thing I have in here beyond the X type for this particular example is a little bit of styling. I put a little padding around here just to draw out the calendar. So you can see how straightforward it is. If I look at a grid example, here's a good example of a grid. And you'll notice that for the grid itself, I have, I'll come down here, ReExt component with X type of grid. And the configs for a grid are things like columns, a store, perhaps the title. You could have events here to handle a click, so a select event, things like that. So that on select is for the select event. So this is a very good resource to use to understand how to build a ReExt application and what components are available from the underlying Ext JS library. So how do you get started with the product? Well, first thing you need to do is pick your tool set. As I said, the vastly most popular way to build React applications nowadays is with this tool called Vite, V-I-T-E. And what I have here is just a list of a set of command line items to quickly get started with your initial project. Those examples are also available on the NPM package page. So if you go here to this quick start on the table of contents, you'll notice that there are examples of doing a quick start in Vite. Create React App is also somewhat popular. It has been popular. It's kind of, I think it's actually officially not supported anymore, or it's open source. But Vite is what I'm going to focus on. And there are examples here for the Mac, for Windows. So you should have an ability to pick one of these to go and get started. And I'm going to pick the Vite examples to get started. And let me just explain these real quick, and then I'm going to run them. The first thing I'm going to do is do an npm create of a Vite application with a React template. So this will create a default React application. I'll then change my directory into that folder that I'm creating. I'm calling it ReExt Vite. I'm going to then npm install ReExt, the latest version. That npm install will actually do an npm install of everything that the application needs. These 3 lines will just copy a little bit of sample code that comes with the ReExt package, just so you can get up and running very quickly. And then this last statement, npx vite open, will open up a server against your project so you can see the project running. So literally, I can copy all of this as an example, bring it into a terminal window, and paste it in and run. So right now what's happening is the ReExt Vite project is being scaffolded. I'm into the creation step, which gets me up and running. And the last step is a step that gets me a running application. And if I simply click on this, or actually bring up this page, it will show me the running application. So you can see it's very quick to get started with ReExt, and Vite is a big reason for that. This is a very simple sample page. It's got an Ext JS grid with a couple rows in it. I can click on those rows, and these are display fields that allow me to display it. I have a ReExt button that allows me to orient this with rows and columns. And you'll also notice I've got a little logo up here that tells me the version of ReExt I'm running. This is the latest version. That I'm running in a production mode, that I'm using version 18.3.1 of React, which is the latest generally available version, and also the latest version of Ext JS, which is 7.8. And I'm also using it remotely, so I didn't necessarily bring down the code to run, but in a production environment, you're going to want to bundle everything together, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, I'm using the classic toolkit and the classic theme of the classic toolkit. That could be the modern toolkit, that could be the material theme. All of the themes, all of both toolkits are available to your project. So that's a very quick way to get up and running with ReExt. Now let's take a look at the project itself. So let me actually come back here, come back to my command line window. let me stop the running server and let me run Visual Studio Code against this folder. So bring my editor up, and to run Visual Studio Code against the current folder, it's just code and a dot. So I go ahead and run this, and I'll bring it full screen. And you can see a handful of files that comprise your application. There's an index.html, there's a src source folder, and everything kicks off in this main.jsx file. And that's the first place I want to start. So you'll also notice that among a few other things in package.json, we have the Sencha ReExt component installed from npm. You'll notice here it's again the latest version. The npm install created the node modules folder, and here is the folder for ReExt. So all of that was done with the installation that I ran. So as I said, the first thing that happens is your application will start up in main.jsx. And main.jsx is the first place you're going to use some ReExt capabilities. You'll notice on line 3 here that we have 2 functions that we export. The first function, fill, is just a function to use some CSS to make things nice and clean. This function is the first important ReExt function. It's the ReExt provider. The ReExt provider is what's used to provide the ReExt capabilities for your application. And it's a global provider, just like other global providers you've used in React. And among other things that it does is it brings in the version of the SDK that you want, the Ext JS SDK. It brings in the toolkit, brings in the theme, any additional packages, etc. So you'll notice here that one of the parameters to ReExt provider is ReExt data, and ReExt data is right here. So as you can see, it's pointing to an SDK version, so Ext JS version 7.8, the classic toolkit, the classic theme. It doesn't happen to be using any particular packages like charts or calendar, just because this is a very simple starter app. But by just setting these to true, you'd enable those. It supports right to left languages. It supports locales. There's some debugging capabilities potentially. And as I said, we're currently running from a remote version of Ext JS, a remote version that if you run this initially, it will be a trial version. So all of this gets everything started. Then you'll notice that inside the provider, we use the app component. So let's take a look at app. And app is where we begin to use the components of ReExt. So again, up top here, we are importing the ReExt component, the single component that makes all this happen. And as you can see down here, we have several ReExt components as subcomponents of the app component. We have the logo. Let me kind of bring this to the side here and bring the browser up to the side so we can kind of explain what all these things are. So here is the ReExt logo. That right there is what's producing this. Here is the button component that's producing this button. Then we have a grid, which starts here, goes all the way down to here. That grid has columns and data and a proxy. It just happens to be a memory proxy, but this could be a proxy out to your JSON-based server. And then down here, we have 3 display fields, 1, 2, 3. So really, it's just using the ReExt component, assigning it an X type, and then depending on the X type, providing it with certain configs, for example, in the grid, that are associated with that X type. You may be asking yourself, how do I know what configs are associated with that X type? And you have several ways to learn that. We certainly have very robust documentation for the Ext JS components. And as I mentioned, we're starting to build a little bit of productivity functionality into a VS Code extension, and that will also give you some insight into what the configs are for a given component. So that's really the structure of an application. And as you can see, I'm not only using ReExt components, but I'm using other components. I can use any JSX that makes sense within React. This happens to be a lot of divs, but if I have a third-party library or if I built my own custom component, that will easily work and run side by side with the ReExt components. Okay, so with that, let's go back to the slides and let's talk a little bit about the other things that are available within ReExt. This slide just documents the main.jsx file. We've already gone through that, so no need to do that again. The other major thing is the underlying Ext JS SDK. So again, the way we are running in this current example is we are running in what I call remote mode. And remote mode brings the Ext JS SDK files to your application from a remote server. And the remote capabilities are initially delivered as our Ext JS trial. So you can see that Ext JS trial is the watermark that's on the grid. The reason for that is that when you're ready to use the ReExt product, you do need a licensed version of the Ext JS libraries. And so how do you typically get that licensed version? Well, the main way that most customers get the licensed version is to go to the Sencha support portal. So when you buy a license, you get an ID and a password to the Sencha support portal, and there's a download section. In that download section, actually, I should maybe just go here and show you. So let me go over here to downloads. So in this download section, you are able to download the latest version of Ext JS just by clicking this blue button, or any past versions. And as I said, ReExt supports any 7x version. So from 7.0 all the way up to 7.8. So you click this, that will produce a zip file. You can also get the premium add-ons. The premium add-ons are things like the calendar, pivot grid, the D3 integration. D3 is a visualization capability. So if you are an enterprise license, you will also have access to the premium add-ons. That also can be downloaded, and it is downloaded as a zip file. Once you download those two zip files, so for example, for 7.7, these would be the names of the files, you would unzip those two SDK files into the public project folder of your Vite application. So you'll notice here that there's a public folder, and right now there is no local SDK because I didn't download the two zips. That's why I'm running remotely. But if I do download and install those two, I could then change to be running against the local version of my Ext JS components. And if I want to run against the local version, I change the ReExt data location field from remote to local. And that's all documented in the README. It's all documented in our documentation how to do that. So a simple download, unzip, and the change of the remote to local. Admittedly, those are a lot of steps, and you got to get them right. And that's one of the areas that I'll show you in a bit that we're trying to address with the VS Code extension productivity tools. So on that subject, as long as we're talking about a better way to do this, let's talk about this preview of the VS Code extension that I'm mentioning. We're calling it the ReExt Designer. So if you look at the ReExt NPM README page, you'll notice that there is an item in the table of contents using the ReExt Designer VS Code extension preview version. So we do have a preview that's available. If you click this link, it will download, and I've already downloaded it, so I'll show you how to use it. This simply will download it to your downloads folder. And then once you have downloaded it, it's pretty simple in Visual Studio Code to install an extension. So let's start there. So I'm going to bring up an empty version of Visual Studio Code. So this is no project. The ReExt Designer is not installed yet. And I'm going to go over here to this extensions button and click on this menu to install from a VSIX. So extensions are delivered as .vsix files. And here's the file that was downloaded from the NPM page. It's called ReExt Designer-latest. I go ahead and click install. You'll notice that the extension installed, and the first thing that shows up is something we're calling the ReExt Hub. So this is kind of the place you can work, where everything is going to be defined, where you can quickly get started. And you'll notice here that I have a new project link. So let me actually clean this up and click on new project. So the work that I just did to create a new project can be done within this extension just by going to create new project. And if I open up this folder, you'll see that the folder that I created, the ReExt Vite folder, is already created. I'm going to go ahead and create something new. So we'll just call this new project. Doesn't matter what we call it. Currently in the preview, it's locked to version 7.8, classic toolkit, classic theme, and you're not able to select packages, but very shortly we'll work on expanding that to everything that's available. So what I'm going to simply do here is click the create button, and you'll notice here I got a little bit of documentation of when the VS Code extension started. A couple I should probably point out is that this VS Code extension also knows that you're living in a world where you may need to go to the support portal to get versions of Ext JS, and you may want to get at the production version of the ReExt component, and that production version lives on the Sencha NPM repository. The extension will automatically try to log in to each one of those. So you can see here in green, I'm successfully logged into the NPM repository where I can get the production version of ReExt, and I could log in to the portal if I need to, and I will in a moment. And it gives me information to that fact. I'm going to go ahead and clear this output and go ahead and create the new project. So you'll notice here that just like what I did in the terminal window, it is creating a new project. It is also NPM installing the ReExt component. It copies those 3 files, and within seconds, everything is ready to go. It will also give you a button that says, okay, you've just created this new project. Let's go ahead and open it. Now we're opened in Visual Studio Code within the context of that project, and I'm ready to start using the application. You'll notice now that the hub shows me a server can be started or a server can be stopped. I can still create new projects or do some other things with the SDK, but I'm going to go ahead and start the server. So you'll notice what happens here is I get a window that has a browser in it, just like the browser I was looking at before. I can use the application, but I've got some additional functionality. I've got this ability up here to go into what I'll call inspect mode. So if I go into inspect mode and go through the page, it will find the ReExt components. If I click on one of them, like the grid, I can open the document that is associated with that component. So it found it in app.js. Notice it highlighted the grid. And if I click on it, it now gives me this edit window full of information about ReExt. For example, it knows it's an X type of grid. So here's the grid documentation. It knows it has some props, class name, style, and ready, and style has some data, so it fills that in. It has some configs, and these are all of the configs of a grid, and here's all of the events of a grid. If I go to configs and click this filter, it'll show me the configs that I'm actually using. So I'm using columns, I'm using store, I'm using title. We're thinking about making this more visually editable. So here's the columns config. out as an object or as an array. This is really not fully baked yet. This is only read only for the preview version, but you can start getting some of the idea. And I can continue to go through here. I could say I want to see what this button is all about, and it'll change the context to that. And if I had multiple pages in my application, it knows that a particular component is on a particular page. We're also talking about dragging and dropping components. This is also just a preview, but you get the idea of some of the things we're thinking about when it comes to productivity enhancements. The last thing I want to talk about in here is that issue of going and getting an SDK version from the support portal. Again, there were multiple steps. You had to know where to put it. You had to know how to unzip it, etc. So this SDK button gives me the ability to automate that through the Visual Studio Code extension. So it notices that I'm not logged onto the portal. So I'll go ahead and log in. So that's me logging into the portal. And once I log in, this SDK versions folder will appear, and it'll give me the ability to download a version. So if I want 7.8, merely selecting download will do all of that work that I mentioned. It will go get the zip file, it will unzip the zip file, it will put it in the public folder. It does take a while, but once it's done, it is in the right place, and you are able to then change the location from remote, which is going to the server and giving you a trial, to local, which then will give you the ability to use that local version. It prepares you for development, and it prepares you to actually utilize ReExt as you build for production. So that's just a little bit of a preview. Certainly feel free to go ahead and get it and take a look at it. I would welcome any feedback. If you have ideas or thoughts, we'd love to talk with you about that. Okay. So there's just some supporting slides in here that talk about how you get the package, the ReExt Designer package, the VSIX file, how you install it, and then a screenshot of essentially what I just showed you, which is the edit view. We have the documentation. The hub is always sitting on the bottom here. We have the browser with the ability to go into inspect mode. So just to give you a little bit of context as to what the ReExt Designer could be. So that's my overview of ReExt. It's very approachable. I want you to give it a try. I am personally available if you have some questions. As a matter of fact, we're going to spend some time now taking questions. And if you do have any questions, there is a questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to type those questions in. We'll spend a little bit of time here answering those questions, but if you think of something after the webinar is finished, or you have maybe some more specific of a question, feel free to email me. You see my email on the screen there. I'd be happy to connect with you to talk further. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to see if we have any questions and get into answering them.
All right. Thank you, Mark. My name is Raj. I'm Marketing Manager, Sencha. Now let's move on to Q&A session. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat and we will address as many as we can today. All right, so the first question we have here, what version of Ext JS is supported for ReExt?
Yes, we support all of the active versions of Ext JS, which are all the 7X versions. Certainly if you're on a version pre 7, we have a lot of facilities and a lot of capabilities to get you into the version 7 environment. But version 7's been out for a while. It's already on version 7.8. We're working on the next version as we speak. So any 7X version is usable against ReExt.
Thank you, Mark. We have other side of the question here. does it support latest version of React for ReExt?
Good question. As you saw, the current version is running against React 18.3, I believe, which is the latest version of React. If you live in that world, you know that right around the corner, sometime soon, version 19 will appear. And it's actually been out in Canary and beta for a bit and for a while. And we already have tested with one of the beta versions, the version 19 of React, and ReExt does work. So we fully intend, when the GA version of React comes to be, to make sure everything still works and make ReExt available on version 19. We've really architected ReExt to make it easy for new versions to be incorporated. New versions of React, as I just mentioned, and also new versions of Ext JS. So when the next version 7.9 comes out, we expect support for that, essentially immediately. So keeping up with the latest versions is very, very important to us, and we know it's important to you as well.
All right, great. The next question we have here is, does using ReExt provide IntelliSense with available configs for components?
Can you just read that one more time, just make sure I understand it?
Sure. The question here is, does using ReExt provide IntelliSense with available configs?
Does ReExt provide IntelliSense with available configs for components? There's going to be a yes and a no answer to this. So the technical configs of ReExt are the five configs: X type, style, the config component itself, and the on-click events. There's also a bunch of, you could think of them as props, but there are a bunch of things that will be in the config itself. Those are not handled by ReExt itself. We do have some capabilities with our other plugins and extensions for Ext JS. So we have IntelliSense that we provide for the configs of Ext JS with the Visual Studio Code for Ext JS plugin. That's certainly something that we would want to look at marrying together, but the support that you'll have for knowing or having the equivalent of IntelliSense is with this extension. So you'll notice as I click on things, it is very aware of the specific configs and events and props for each component. And for example, if I wanted to know, what I can use here as a config, it's text. And if I click into the text field, I'm going to get whatever documentation is available for that particular config or that particular event. So this is really a really good way to have that productivity in terms of understanding what configs are available, what they're used for, and we will continue to enhance this as we move forward. So that's probably your best bet, is to utilize some of this capability within the plugin, within the extension.
That's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Does ReExt library help in migrating existing Ext JS applications into React?
Well, the reason we built it the way we did, the reason why we didn't have an individual config or an individual prop for every config, is so that you could bring your application forward with minimal changes. So if you take as an example a grid, this object that's in the config, it goes actually from here, the yellow down here, all the way up to here, would be identical to what you would have built when you were using Ext JS. To take that a step further, as I mentioned before, if you've built a complete component, if you've built a custom config or a custom component, and you want to utilize that in total. You don't even want to change it to React. You want to bring that in as a custom component. That is all possible. As a matter of fact, if I can bring up, let me see if I can find it in here. If you're interested in using custom components, the table of contents number 11 here talks about how to do that. So for example, if I showed you this example code here, you'll notice that the ReExt X type that I'm using here is not a standard X type. It's called main list. What is main list? Well, main list might be something you built in Ext JS. And if I look up here and try to find that component, actually it's down here. Here is the ext define for the X type of main list, totally brought into your application. So you can bring your code in without modifying it at all, and then utilize that X type as a ReExt X type. So that's the vision that we have for people who maybe have built a lot of collateral and a lot of things within Ext JS, and they want to bring it forward. This is probably the best way to do it, to just bring in your defines and then use those as custom X types. And again, if you need more context or more discussion or more understanding of that, certainly send me an email and we can talk further about it.
Right, great. So probably this is a follow-up question to that. Is there a path for adopting existing XJS apps, or is it recommended to stay in XJS? We have wanted to move to React, but we have very large XJS applications in version 7. We also have a multiple app workspace.
Yep. I think some of the discussion that I was just having about where you can take custom components. So inevitably, if you have a big Ext JS applications, you've built your own components. I can't imagine a big application not having its own components. The beauty of ReExt is that you can take those components in total and essentially have a React component against that component that you've already built. So there's no automatic path to that, but we certainly have set the groundwork so that you can bring that application forward, bring it into React, start utilizing some of that ecosystem. And it sounds like in your case with the complex application, it might be helpful to do a little session together just to kind of talk maybe a little bit more specifically about how you might be able to do that. And that's one thing we offer. I mean, if you have an existing application and you want a little bit of guidance, talk to your sales rep. They'll get me involved and we can have that discussion and really start setting some perspective on how you might move forward.
So another follow-up question to that.
Yep.
About importing custom components, could one import the entire XJS application component?
Potentially. I mean, it's not really an X type, but maybe one level below application. Typically, when you have an Ext application, you have a root level component that you're bringing in or that you're starting. That root level component could certainly qualify. So that potentially could be the way you do that. Yeah, that's an interesting way to do it. Yep. And I don't see any reason why that couldn't be an approach you take. Yep. Good idea.
All right. Okay, great. We have a couple of licensing questions here.
Yep.
Subscription or login to run the command npm, because I'm getting 403 forbidden error indicating that unregistered users are not allowed access to the package.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about licensing as it relates to ReExt. First of all, the philosophy we have is that we want to make this thing accessible. We want you to be able to use it. We want you to be able to see it. And that's why we have the ReExt component or the ReExt package on public NPM. So you can come here, you don't have to sign on to get the public NPM. You can do an NPM install. It all works. Now, what you will get if you build an application is you will get a dialog in the application that will give you the ability to request a trial key. So a trial key doesn't cost anything. It just gives you the ability to not have the trial key dialog keep coming up. And that also gives us some insight as to, you know, what you're trying to do. We want to be able to help you through this process. We want to know who you are and, you know, lend guidance, send you things that will help you in your journey. So all of that does not require any particular license or any particular set of files. You even heard that to get started, you don't even have to have the SDK local to your machine. We provide that remotely as a trial, and you know, you can get up and running very quickly. Now, once you do get to that next step, either you are a licensed customer or you do buy a license, then what you get is credentials for the support portal, which gives you the ability to get at the copies of the SDK to bring them local to your machine. And you also get access to the NPM repository that we have. That NPM repository is a repository that doesn't have any watermarks on anything, that doesn't require a trial key, and that's when you're accessing things kind of from a production point of view. It is the same component. You don't have to change your code at all. It just acquires the ReExt package without the trial and watermark capabilities. So I don't know where you're getting stuck in that process, but certainly getting started, you should be able to get at everything. If you're not, and you have some questions, please, again, get a hold of me. We'll solve those.
All right, thank you. This is regarding if I do not have a login to Sencha, I'm a developer, just want to learn, what are my options?
Your options are just to go to this public NPM package, go grab this just the way I did, run it, and in about 30 seconds, you'll have a running application. The only thing that'll be different is that you'll get a dialog requesting a license key, and you'll have some watermarks on the components. But you don't need anything to get started. You just need to go to this NPM package page.
Great, thank you. Right, that wraps up our presentation for today.
Great. Well, as I said, I'm looking forward to any feedback or any discussions that any of you may want to have. We're excited about being able to provide all of the well-tested, robust, data-centric components to the world of React developers. Get in contact with me with any questions. Let us know what you're doing, and we look forward to hearing from you and to discuss further in upcoming webinars.
That's great. Thank you for joining us and for your time. We hope you found it valuable and informative.
Thank you.
Thank you.